I'm joined by Oren Meets World, Oren John, who I like to call the internet's creative director. I'm super excited to have you here today, Oren.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm excited to be here too. Probably my favorite thing is to talk about design and brands. So
me too. Let's geek out. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you today because to me, you represent the intersection of great brand and great design. And you can't really have a great brand without great design, whether it's through, design of product or execution and how you present your brand story and your brand core. And that's really what I want to dig into today.
No, awesome. I'd love to talk about it. And as you could tell from some of the content, I've spent a lot of time thinking and digesting that. So where do you want to start?
I know it's like an overwhelming, philosophical, probably like lifelong journey. I feel the same way. That's why I'm super excited that we're connected. But yeah, like I guess kind of where to start. I definitely want to get into your story. But I want to kind of preface this that I see creative direction and like good branding as almost kind of where the engineers or the architects, like there's really kind of high level intellect that goes into it. And that's really what I want to get out of today's conversation is that it's not just kind of artistic people throwing something at a wall and seeing if it sticks. Like there's a lot of intention and thoughtfulness that goes into what we see as iconic. And like the original Apple campaigns, like they didn't just think different, wasn't just like something they decided to run with. Like there's a lot of thinking that goes into it.
Yeah, I agree. And it's funny because I think a lot of my philosophy on this actually comes from product design then applied to brand and creative direction.
Yeah.
Just because I spent a lot of years in consumer electronics and where everyone is so consumed with UX and usability and how the user experiences everything. And you have that really ingrained into you on the product side of the business. And then you get into the creative side and it's so much more intangible when really I think you can apply those same principles.
I think that's what probably makes you great too, is having that range, because having range is what makes you just an intellectual and enlightened thinker, because just being in one kind of box just keeps you in one kind of box. So what's your story? Tell me how'd you...
So I started as a designer, and so I went to school for design. I was a designer for kind of various marketing and branding groups for the first chunk of my career, but then transitioned over more into marketing and, was in content marketing all the way to kind of paid performance, all the way to full marketing, and then from marketing to sales, and then to fully operating businesses. And so the last business I was at, kind of fully full-time, I was the president of a larger organization, about 200 people. And so I've kind of run through the full gambit of, design, marketing, product, sales, to actually running kind of full businesses. And then now have my hands in all of kind of number of things, like kind of entrepreneurially. But to your point, like that holistic view is what makes things interesting. I make content on the internet about creative direction and et cetera, because it's really interesting to me. But without that perspective of sales or product design or marketing, it would be hard to have the context as to why these things do well and what's interesting about them.
And in all of I didn't realize how expansive your background was. What was, of all the jobs you had, which one did you learn the most from and why?
So I worked at a lot of the things I've done have been in like regulated or complicated industries. And so one of them that I learned a lot at was in the consumer drone space. So like camera drones.
Cool.
So I was the kind of VP of marketing at a company that, back when that was becoming a category. And why I learned so much was because it was brand new, right? There was drone was still associated with, at least the word of it was associated with like, what was happening at war. And then people had not yet kind of gotten this through their heads that like, oh, you can add this new perspective into videography and camera. And then you have to explain all that to customers in like a Best Buy or a retail store in like a concise package. And then kind of sell those ideas and feature sets versus, Chinese companies that can make things for a fraction of the price. And so that was probably the job where I learned the most, because it was so fast paced, a brand new industry, super competitive. And it had like content at its heart, because people use the product to make content. And so I take a lot of the perspective from that era into like a lot of the work I do now.
And I just did a video talking about like target market personas. And I feel like when I think about the drone category, like there's a really committed community to droning. And it's actually kind of something that
it's super committed.
I feel like it kind of snuck up. Like I didn't even really realize like how burgeoning this like drone community was. And then by the time it like kind of hit me as like, I guess, a late adopter, I felt like so behind the curve of where kind of this aerial photography had gone.
Yeah, and I think it was funny because when we started the business, or the business that when I was brought into it, it was really community focused for hobbyists who made their own. So actually the entire industry was really birthed out of community. There was these really big forums online where people were essentially piecing together parts and buying autopilots and flight controllers and doing their own code, and it was something that like had a big open source community to it too. And then based on that came this whole industry, and so it really had that like hobbyist portion of this at its heart. And so the brand I worked for sold do-it-yourself kits is like the first thing, like into hobby stores. And then it sold like programmable smaller drones into hobby stores. And then it was like, okay, now we're making fully polished consumer products. And it is interesting, like kind of watching a journey like that and how powerful that idea of that initial community is, and then how that community maintains through an industry when it starts from it, even a decade later.
That's super interesting, because that makes sense why my experience with that industry had felt so like ambient. Like I didn't really realize when it showed up, but because it was built by the community. Like when I think of who does droning the best, the only brand that comes to mind is DJI. And I think DJI has done such a great job is it's kind of owned like the creator space. So it's, it's not, I don't know if they even started in drones. Like I know did they? Like I think they've got a pretty good drone, like they've got a great drone product line, right?
Yeah. So they are the player. And so the brand that I was at was basically moved early against them, and got dominated by them at retail because they're in Shenzhen, and they basically can just go cheaper, more better than anyone else. If you're an American company making your product in China,
you can't compete,
and you have a Chinese company that is kind of more technically advanced, and they did a really great job. One of the few brands I think in the hardware space who's done a truly great job crossing over, especially in that era from Shenzhen, and then just making incredible sensors, incredible cameras, great flight control. And then I think over time, as they became kind of the only brand, there's other brands out there, but they're much smaller, the community kind of migrates to where the product is.
Where DJI has brought a lot of people kind of into the community, like because I've known people who weren't droners, like I think probably watched a bunch of like those like EDM like beats on YouTube. I think that's kind of where drone photography for me has become like the super iconic. Like when you're at like the nail salon, or like it's like over a Ibiza in Greece, and it's like
just playing
endless playlists of beats, where like basically dads saw that a bunch somewhere and then decided to start buying drones for like their family vacations. But because DJI has become the like family drone purchase product, I really I've learned to start trusting it for like I got the really cool like super mini the DJI Pocket Pro, very cool. Yeah. Got the wireless mics, and I'm in content creating, but I've got a team that knows that stuff. Like it's become kind of a trusted brand through I guess being just a great product, but that does suck to be in their category because you really can't.
Yeah, they really care about user experience.
Yeah, that's really interesting and cool.
Yeah. So that's what happened is, competing vertically integrated with them was very tough in that initial category, but I have a lot of respect for the brand because they're so laser focused on user experience now. Like to your point, all of those products are kind of relatively different, right? But like they are able to enter those spaces, whether it's a pro audio microphone or a pro audio gimbal or that super pocket pro, and they really care about, okay, I'm turning this on to make content. Like, here's how we do it. And one thing I reference about them a lot is they were one of the first people to add a vertical video mode to the drone. They had their initial Mavic drone, had a little button you could hit, and it would move the camera vertical. And like at the time, all the behemoth old camera companies weren't even thinking about that whatsoever. There's no way they would do it. And it was just like, this is being done by people that actually have to do this every day, that understand that a good chunk of the stuff they're being asked to do is going to be captured in this format. And when companies think like that, especially electronics companies and new ones,
they win.
Like that's where you can kind of find your brand edge.
So, and I was talking about this today, like just the power of like high fidelity information versus low fidelity information. And if you're looking for a way to stand out, it's often just like actually like going to the ground, like just like you get so in the weeds when you're 50,000 feet up that you forget about those simple tweaks that really help you get ahead. And often the best concepts are simple, but simple isn't easy, right? It's like right in front of you, and you feel like you're constantly chasing whatever you're chasing. Probably in the drone industry was probably a lot of bullshit, especially with all the regulations you probably faced, that you forget the simple things like vertical.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think, look, and that ties a lot into when we talk about now branding or creative direction or community, a lot of these buzzwords we've hit, but like kind of talked about in the electronics way, is that I feel like whoever that connection point is between an organization to its users, and whoever their voice is as to like what they want or what they're interested in, is like such a crucial role. And it's almost easier than ever because we have so much access to users and information and the things we see on social media. But that almost makes it overwhelming that people don't actually go and take the time to sort through it.
To do it simple. I think that kind of leads probably to where I want to go next. I was analyzing what content of yours really did the best. And it was interesting to me that are you buying the brand or are you buying the product has become what looks like to me as like a big piece of your brand. How did that start?
You know, it's funny. It's so a lot of the videos, something you do when you create a lot of social media is you see the things that work and then you kind of iterate on the concepts of it. And so those videos at its core are about product categories. And so some of the first big videos I ever had, one was about Remova luggage. I had another big one about like stainless steel pans. It's just concepts that are appealing to everyone. Everyone uses pans. Everyone has luggage, versus so many of the concepts I talk about that are like more tactical are only really relatable to a marketing person.
Yeah.
And so something I recommend a lot of creators do is, as you grow every 3 months or 4 months, like remake your good content. Like I've remade a video about luggage almost every 3 or 4 months my entire creative career, which is not super long. I've only been making content like 18 months, and just taken a new spin or a new angle or whatever I've learned because I know it resonates. And so, for instance, on the product versus brand, like it started with just making videos about the brands. And then I had some where I was making like videos about status products, where I'd like identify ones that are more premium for whatever reason. And then actually my manager, Anthony, who I think we both
shout out
know,
to DeLuca.
He was like, hey, like we should really talk about this. Yeah, exactly. He had this initial idea for that series where he's like, hey, you should present this from a perspective of like, you know, why are people paying like a premium for one product over another, you know, and like why, and are they doing that for the right reasons? And he'd bugged me about it for a while, and then you know we had kind of I approached some of those same categories with it, like I'd done before, luggage and pans, and then also as a vehicle to talk about new ones. But I think people like it because they want to know from a professional perspective, like they want someone whose opinion they trust to tell them, oh, am I making the right decision, or to help enable the decision. Because right now we have like choice overload online, right? Where we have a million brands, a million things, and the brands are all telling us, here's why ours is special. But there's very few people that are willing to say anything negative or willing to have any kind of opinion, a way explaining why. And so I can, at least from my perspective, give that on some categories.
And that was something that I was left, and I'm happy that I have you in longer form because I want to be able to ask questions because I can, because in watching those videos, I found them very interesting. Like I liked watching them and getting your perspective, but it left me kind of wanting more. So when you explain you're buying the brand versus you're buying the product, is your summary that is not worth buying?
No, I think it depends what you're buying for, right? And so I think, and that's where it's a great video series because it leaves a lot of room for conversation, right?
And controversy, yeah.
And there's some brands where there's a reason to buy for a good thing. Some people may say, hey, this brand, it really is aligned with my ideals or supports things that, you know, the communities that I'm in or whatever it is. And so that's a reason for me to buy the brand, or that I want to have a premium thing. And that is something that I value, that I value owning a luxury brand and feeling good about myself because I have it. That's completely okay. But there's plenty of people that kind of want to know, hey, am I sort of being sold a bill of goods here when I could really just be getting something equally as good, you know, like slightly down the line? Or is there even a better brand for me to look at than what I chose because of these reasons? And, you know, it's a big intangible space, but I think it actually makes people think critically about their relationship with what they buy and with how they feel about brands. And I think as commerce and life become so intertwined, I think that's an important thing for people to think about.
Oh, and I had 2 questions in your pans one. So the first one is, what is your opinion on our place?
And so look, I had
be honest.
Our place I've like thrown some shots at because like we had an experience during the pandemic that I think a lot of people had where my wife purchased those pans. She was super excited about them. they stopped working. The support was unhelpful, and that's like such a rare experience now where like not only do you get excited about something, but then you buy it, you pay a premium for it, and then it doesn't work, and then you have a bad customer experience. And especially for like a modern brand, it seems kind of ridiculous. And so I just kind of have taken some shots at that pretty casually, but it was funny because it struck such a nerve each time.
No, like people feel really connected
thousands and
to
thousands
this brand.
Of people who've had that same experience.
Oh, interesting. I haven't heard this side
well, I
of
think
it.
so. You get it both ways. Yeah. So if you go through the comments of what I have on the 2 videos where I mentioned that, there are hundreds and hundreds of people being like, I did this, I dealt with that, like it had the same experience. And I think the defenders like the brand, and there's plenty of good things to like about the brand. And I like that they've pivoted to electronics now. They have a lot of things that they're working through. There's good things there. And their customer support has improved kind of greatly, which I think is a lot from the pressure of not just my content, but plenty of content. But yeah, there's plenty of people that have that same experience, and they have the experience with other kind of, lack of a better term, like millennial influencer brands. And so it struck a chord from that perspective as well.
That's really interesting because I really love my Our Place plant pan, but it actually shows me how often I cook because it looks so pretty new. Yeah. So I'll put it through a few more use cases and I'll probably be like right on the same page. The other one that I wanted to ask you about was Le Creuset, because you really talk about this being kind of a masterclass for brand and product. And I've always just kind of accepted it for what it is. I want you to dig into that.
Yeah, and so I think, look, they have an amazing product that they charge a premium for with a heritage brand. But what the thing that they've done that's particularly interesting is they've really built this concept that you build your kitchen around Le Creuset, and you use your and you then build your collection of their pans around your kitchen. And so they have all this immersive content on colorways and how the various colors go together and how they would look with the palette of what your kitchen looks like. And then they have this huge, affiliate marketing network that whenever they release a new color, there's hundreds of kitchen blogs that get paid their $11 per pan that gets clicked from their site that then go talk in depth about all the new color and why it works, and it's going away. So there's an exclusivity element where they remove colors. And I think that they've just taken something completely commoditized and by innately caring in knowing that their customers care about how their kitchen looks and how it's presented, even if that seems minor, and that they'll obsess about it, they've created a unique vertical that helps them justify their price point.
So cool. And that's so my experience without even really realizing it, because to me it's always felt like such a random brand until they opened a store downtown Toronto right across from where I live. And I was kind of shocked that Le Creuset was like investing in kind of the millennial audience and where they decided to place a store. But I went in and I bought an entire dog food set based off of this like light pink colorway. And I realized when I brought it in that I had only ever bought in the light blue colorway. And they've done in such a sneaky way become a luxury in the kitchen space without really ever letting you know that it's a brand in your face. Like, it's such a staple or rite of passage for a higher end kitchen. It's so cool the way they've done it.
With the premium product like that too. So what they've done, like when you talk about like a luxury, I like to make a connotation between a luxury brand and a designer brand.
Yeah.
And so like a designer brand is a brand that, because something looks really good or it was intentionally designed, you can charge a premium. And I put Our Place in that category, right? They succeeded a lot because they put out really good looking products. And then you have, 2 other qualities to becoming luxury, and one of them is quality, and the other is time. And so for instance, if Our Place had amazing quality in those, and obviously I think maybe they've improved that now, but it wasn't the case at the beginning, then over the course of time they would be kind of moving towards being cemented as a luxury brand. Now with someone like Le Creuset, they have had decades of quality. And so whenever they introduce anything that looks good or looks interesting, they're already like cemented inside this luxury space. And so I think for them to appeal to the millennial consumer that a more designer brand was going to, really they just had to intentionally think about design. They already had all the other pieces in place. And I think that was it's an interesting way to think about it.
Because like me getting the dog bowls and I only had the salt and pepper shakers, and I had some like a salt kind of almost ramekin kind of thing. But after getting the dog bowls and the dog like treat, I was like, exactly to your point, what else can I buy now that they have everything in this color palette? Like doing colorways, if it works for your brand, is such a great way to tack on second, third, and fourth or future sales. Like it's such a way to be brand loyal and not pick another brand because I want it uniform.
Well, and then they go beyond uniform is what I like about their strategy. Is so they have all these, their Pinterest is a great example of this, where you go to their Pinterest, they have like all these color mock-up cards of how their different colorways work with each other. So for instance, you have the light blue pants to start. You can go pull up the light blue section they have, and they'll be like, you know what goes great with light blue? Our pink shade. Have you considered this ombre gray? And then they'll like work through how you could palletize your kitchen. And like, that's genius too, because then you can be like, oh, well, like I can bring in a third color. And then, yeah, it's exactly. And then it's like, oh, I could match the new marble. And then, then you're in deep.
Like literally cracked to my brain. I actually think about that all the time. I think that you should sell insight into your Pinterest board. Like I can only imagine what your Pinterest algorithm looks like. It's probably sick.
Yeah, it's great, and I do a lot on Arena now, which is like a little bit different. But
ooh, what's Arena? I haven't heard of this. Time,
when I needed to make a video idea, I was so it's are.na. So it's like Pinterest, but all of the boards are. It doesn't surface stuff for discovery as well. It still does, like the way Pinterest surfaces stuff based on your search. But the plus side of Arena is that everyone on there everyone's like a creative director or an art director or a photographer that like works in it. It's where like all the people who are really working in it go. So when you start going into boards, they're like such higher quality than anything you'll see on Pinterest. And it's like legit working people right now who are doing stuff at like interesting brands. And so like the quality of the curation is just like next absolutely level. Incredible.
Because that is the one thing with Pinterest is that like half of it can be, that's why I love like that would be like a Friday night, like just to see Oren's Pinterest. Like that'd be the highlight of my week. But the thing that's funny about Pinterest is like half of it is kind of like, I almost want to say like kind of mom like lunch ideas. Like it's very kind of like that middle America kind of like minivan feel is like half of Pinterest, and then the other half is like this like
you can
dark
go down a live
hole.
Laugh love rabbit hole very quickly.
Or like family matching Halloween costumes. But it's like when you can get on the right thread of the cool stuff that exists on Pinterest, like that's when it's like the Tumblr-esque kind of creative direction stuff, but it's hard to get to. You have to have the right algorithm and like invest time in the platform.
Well, also there's a hook around that. So one thing that's actually really useful is you can go search, put a bunch of pins on a board, and then you can click the more, whatever it is, like the more ideas, and then it will give you a little algorithm based on that board. And that's super useful too. So I do this all the time. So if I'm working on like a Western project, for instance, I'll go curate like a Western fashion board, and then I click the more ideas, and then all of a sudden you're given like a little mini Pinterest algorithm just based on the images that you selected in your board. That's super useful too. So I don't even want to turn this into Pinterest hacks, but here we go.
Literally, Pinterest hacks, part 3 of the video. When do you use Pinterest over Arena?
So I think Pinterest is like, I like to, one of the ways I don't lose myself in social media is I try to scroll Pinterest instead of Instagram or Twitter. It's just like a tool for me to like, instead of wasting time on some of those, I'll just do that. So I do a lot of like casual scrolling on Pinterest. But Arena is like when I'm actually working on a project, like everything now, if we're working on like editorial for a shoot or we're working on inspiration for a line composition, it's all on Arena just because there's so much better stuff you can take from people's boards there.
Cool. Okay, cool. So it's kind of like a creator's economy, and you're like getting it from a better caliber of people.
Exactly. Cool. And it's and it's funny because it's like not even like incrementally better. It's like exceptionally better. It's like shocking.
It's overwhelmingly great.
That's like once people start using it, they like really haven't they really have it changes your entire creative workflow. It's
that is a great insight. So you've only been creating content for 18 months. What was the video that hit big?
Yes, my first video was a video about Rimowa and the history there, and just like why I liked the brand. That was probably the first big one I had. The first one that did like, millions and millions. Like that one did like a couple 100K, and I was like, oh, I could keep doing this. I'm trying to think of like what really crossed over. A lot of them were videos about like making clothes that aren't basic, like for brands and stuff like that, like making things that just not screen printing a tee or not making like a basic hoodie. How do you elevate them? I think those were the ones that like really first pushed me on Instagram and a few others.
And is Instagram your main platform or is TikTok?
It is now. TikTok was my main for probably the first 6 or 9 months. And then, Instagram is main now. TikTok is second. I'm new to YouTube. I've been on Twitter the whole time. And that's like a medium one in there. I do still get a lot of email subscribers from there, even though I'm only at like 30K or something like that. But yeah, it's Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, and then YouTube is new as of the last few weeks.
Cool. That's awesome. So why did you start creating content?
Because I had, as I mentioned, like the previous job I'd had was I was operating like a large business, and I was kind of running basically all the business, distribution, manufacturing, sales, et cetera, except for accounting. And I came back out of that. I was like, do I want to do that again? And I, for my next position, I was like, I don't really. That was just a lot. And I was like, I want to really focus on where I feel like I'm the best and where my energy is best directed, which is branding and marketing. Cool. But in the basically 3 or 4 years since I've been in that business, I hadn't thought about social media at all. And I was looking at it, and the last time I'd really been deep in it was like the paid Facebook, Instagram ads era, where that was kind of at its height. And I was like, oh man, this is just way different. And so I was like, if I'm going to get back into this, I have to learn how to do it. And so I'm going to give it a try. I'd rather kind of like be in it by doing it. And then it just went better than expected. Like I was making videos and like they got traction faster than I thought. And then once it got traction, it became a revenue stream and a kind of career changer faster than I thought. And now it's just a core part of what I do every day.
Yeah, I think that's the craziest part for people who are thinking about getting into it, is like the hardest part is always the beginning. And you don't really realize what point that tipping point of where it actually just becomes a part of your life, and you don't, like, opportunities that you get, people you meet would have never happened before doing it. But just getting over yourself to get started in it is the hardest part. It's the resistance.
Yeah. And I made 100 terrible, and that concept of resistance, I think there's that book, The War of Art, which is great.
Yeah, great book. Stephen Pressfield.
Dealing with that concept and can't get through it. That's a good book for it. Yeah, we can do a Stephen Pressfield rabbit hole later, because he's got quite the canon of books.
Have you read his new one?
Actually, we can just do that now. So it's funny. One of my favorite books, I haven't, but the Afghan campaign and some of his war books were like the reasons I started reading it.
They're
like
so
historical
good.
fiction I really like. And then of course he has like some third party. They're so good. And then he has some third party book about like, solving your creative block. And then he has like odd like science fiction. He's got a really interesting arc. So
you got to read his new one. It's called The Daily Pressfield.
Stephen Pressfield rabbit hole, but it had to happen.
The new book, The Daily Pressfield, I really love it.
I'm definitely gonna check that out.
It's basically kind of, you're supposed to read like a one a day, and I'm not. Like I probably read like 20 pages a day, but it kind of elaborates on the war of art, just like what you struggle with as being someone that wants to do something great. And a lot of his stuff focuses on the act of writing, but the act of writing is also just the art of focus, which also Dan Coe wrote about. Did you read that book?
No, I haven't. We're like tangentially connected through some people. So I'm so familiar with his philosophy, but I haven't read that one. But it's funny because I read that, like, that War of Art was really impactful for me, maybe like 10 years ago. But it's funny, and now I have like the opposite level of problems where like crossing things off is no problem. I think there's the adage, right, where it's like, if you want something done, ask a busy person to do it. And like, I'm definitely that person. Like we get through like 100 things every day. And now it's more of like the creative intention behind them, and like what deserves the extra time to make special is like more of the challenge.
I find too, and the more that I dig into this, I agree with you. It's like almost being like, accomplishing more or doing a lot is easy. It's being bored that's hard. And how a lot of like the creative inspiration and being creative comes from boredom. And it's hard to be bored when you're constantly being stimulated and hit, and you got to get a video out, and you've got to respond to this email, and you got to be up for a call in Hong Kong. That's where I'm finding is actually where I need to slow down.
Yeah. It's and this international lifestyle too is like, it's funny. I'm sure you feel that too, but like, I don't know. I had the other day, it was like, I'm on with China until 11. I've got Germany at 6 a.m. You're going through your regular day, and like, and then
I'm fucking exhausted.
It's interesting.
Yeah. I also like too, when you were talking about, I want to get you to touch on it. You talk about it in your Go Yard video. And again, I just love simple concepts and breaking them down, because I feel like we move past the things that are simple. And you talked about how luxury brands are moving into kind of low buy-in, almost verticals or product SKUs, and how you talked about the Go Yard wallet as being a great way that brand became more approachable. And for me, when I think about Go Yard, I had a Go Yard bag 10 years ago, but it was when Go Yard was more, they didn't have locations in as many cities as they do now. So it was a harder brand to get. And I had actually been given as a gift, so I hadn't even bought it. And I remember at some point there was like, again, the Malcolm Gladwell like tipping point of when everybody had Goyard. And I didn't realize when that happened. And I really think that it could be attributable to the wallet. So I want your insight on that, because I found that interesting.
Yeah, I think that's a great one, because that brand was very focused on its art, right? Again, it didn't have the same location presence. They had this unique concept of, I forget how you pronounce it, what's called marquage or something like that, where it's like the decoration, like the illustration on the bags and on the art. They'll do the personalization for you. And so people would like look up to. So the wallet originally, I felt like, was something where you really would intentionally get this personalized piece. And then where the brand really took off was, people would see those, and I'll attribute a lot of that, I think, to like rap videos and social media in the Instagram era. But it became so bootlegged, right? Like once people started noticing that people have them and there's an item they really care about, and that it was like the right people had them, and it's such an easy item for the bootleg economy, for your kind of Canal Street, China economy at that time. And it's so hard to tell that stuff apart in the small leather good market, that it was everywhere from bootleg. And it's funny because I think people will look at that as that might be a negative for the brand, but I think there would be no way the brand would be moving as so many of these totes and bags they would now into the real luxury market if it hadn't become that like massively bootlegged item that it has over the last like 2 years or so.
No, and I think that's every brand that has kind of those like simple styles that become like iconic, like Louis Vuitton and their Damier or their Azur or their just like their LV print. But even like, I mean, you probably won't know this reference, but like the Hills back in the day, like Lauren Conrad would joke about she had a goach, like the bags that became iconic are the ones that got ripped off like at a mass scale by places like Canal Street that aren't hard to access the knockoffs.
Yeah. Once you have that moment where it becomes aspirational, like people are putting it out there, and people want to have that same image, and social media has obviously accelerated this, and like it happened with LV forever, but then for a brand to be able to kind of have a unique enough look that it kind of takes off is interesting. And it's funny because it's like almost waiting in the wings, right? It goes back to that concept that luxury is a factor of time. Like without that kind of heritage behind the brand, they wouldn't have the ability to have that moment. You don't see a new brand come out and get immediately bootlegged to that same extent, at least in the like kind of like luxury bag market. And so it's one of those things where, yeah, I think right now we all look at these brands on these, condensed time frames, especially if you're starting something new, when really you want to look at like, okay, what does being in business for 30 years set you up for if you're able to kind of play into the zeitgeist over time?
Yeah. And I that makes me want to ask you about Louis Vuitton too, because I'm constantly ragging on Louis. I think they're on the decline. And it makes me sad because I think that it's such a great brand with a great history and legacy. But what are your thoughts on Louis Vuitton?
Yeah, look, I am also relatively critical there, and I look at it a lot through the lens of menswear, which I think it has a really interesting, more complicated. It's a conversation there. I think in women's wear, it's fully off. I don't think it. I think it's not good at all. I think it still sells, but I
don't know why.
On your opinion more there, but on yeah, it's all bad. But in men's, it's just a really complicated up and down, right? I think they had such a high in the Virgil era.
Oh, yeah.
And how they embraced streetwear, the creativity that they were executing, and then it dropped to such a low shortly after, and especially with like the early Pharrell there, and now it's a mixed bag in how they're climbing out that I'm critical of, but also realize that I like some of the pieces and understand it's a process to go from where they were to where they need to go. But they do it under such a high like microscope. Like there's so much attention going on at all times, and it just feels to always be a B execution that it's kind of really hard to watch, honestly. But I don't think any of this, or whether it's your opinion or my opinion or what people think critically of, has impacted its sales velocity, which seems to be kind of never ending.
You bring up an interesting point in a different way for me to look at it. Like when I'm looking at Louis Vuitton, I guess there's two sides to the business, right? There's kind of the high fashion cultural like zeitgeist angle where you're looking at it by like, the creative director that's in-house, that's kind of piloting more that like fashion show look. I'm looking at more the Louis Vuitton by way of the ready to wear, but the box down of like, even though Pharrell can create stuff that are like in the ready to wear department, like when I'm looking at Louis Vuitton and where they're opening storefronts, and like how, like for example, they have stores in like random middle America spots where typically, like now a mall that has an Apple store can have a Louis Vuitton, and like that comparison to me of where the brand is going, not on the art direction fashion house kind of, but more of the average person buying the brand being able to enter into it, makes me feel like it's en route for being a Kate Spade. Like it's going to be in that way. But it's interesting the way you talk about it from the creative direction standpoint, because like that's the way that brand houses have always, of like they've gone through cycles, you know, Marc Jacobs being in, Karl Lagerfeld being in, you know, they rise and fall by kind of those periods artistically. But that's an interesting way of looking at it.
Yeah, and that's actually interesting too, because and you may feel different because you may be more inclined or have a larger understanding of how their women's functions. But I feel like the menswear right now is a conversation. Around, there's so many creative directors in and out. It's interesting, even if you don't like it. And there are things happening, and there's a culture, for lack of a better term, kind of revolves around it since as soon as they brought Virgil on to where we are now. I feel like in women's wear, it's been Nicholas as creative director for a long time, and it's almost like a different business. It's almost like, to your point, it's like it's available in the mall, and it is an entry point to luxury. And it's a very... It's not in the conversation in that same way. Like obviously no one's talking about like the creative direction shifts there. And I think that's interesting too, to almost look at those businesses separately, where like the men's business is almost like a hype business. Whereas the other business is like, you know, a few steps above Kate Spade.
No, and I think that's also an interesting thing to reflect on for kind of the death of a brand, because these brand houses that have been around for so long, what makes Louis Vuitton so interesting is its rich history, you know, like starting in trunk wear, and that you can, like, there's stored value in products because you can buy a vintage piece that's 100 years old. Like where does fashion go if it's just, if in the last 50 years it's really become a rat race on, you know, 5-minute creative direction? Like I think that's where my criticism of luxury is. Even Chanel, like Chanel's having 3 price hikes in 1 year, but I go into their store and it feels like pop art. Like there's so much color that it lacks like that heart and personality that Chanel once had.
Yeah, I agree. And actually, I'd be interested. So question back to you, who do you feel like, what are the interesting creative direction and brand choices happening in luxury to you right now?
You know, I actually really respect what Jacquemus is doing. And I think that they dance the line of, you know, I could be critical on one brand for doing similar things, but the way they execute it is so interesting and it's keeping me intrigued. Almost in a way, I talked about this with Gentle Monster about how there's a weirdness and I don't get why they're doing it, but I want to know more, you know, like where it doesn't feel forced. Like when I think of where runway shows have gone, they're throwing so much money to get views on social media, but it's not done in as an intentional way. Whereas I feel like Jacquemus is always, there's just something to it that I'm like, I don't get it, but I love it.
Yeah, well, I think everything is done intentionally. And this is something, I mean, it's good when we go back to the conversation around design and brand. I think every single choice they make, from the store facade to the show rollout to every person seated to every garment, every collab, has so much thought and intention behind it. And when people talk about how do you make a great brand or how do you separate your brand now, it's like, okay, look at every decision point you have. And everyone, down to the style of stitch you do, to the shape or form factor, to every person, everything. If you just make one interesting choice, every decision, just interesting, just something just that's not okay, just do it, then you are immediately setting yourself up to be special, you know, in a certain way. And if you then do that all with a recurring theme or with some insight or with some sauce, then you can get something very special.
What you're saying on the face of it is completely correct. Where I struggle with this is like the takeaway and the teachable is the unfortunate part is that everybody thinks they're acting with strategy and intention. You know, like the people right now that are operating in the women's wear on Louis Vuitton, like they feel like they're operating intentionally, and it's kind of what parameters can you give so that you're actually making a decision that's more like a Jacquemus. Like it has to fit with the brand. But do you get what I'm saying? Like everybody thinks they're working strategically. Like how do you from a creative direction part say, okay, these are the stress tests you have to go through because you are wrong, you know?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a couple things. Yeah, I think is like, So the number one choice is like, is it interesting? And is it objectively interesting? Or is it interesting to your kind of fan group? And so there is this like, okay, I'm doing the thing, I'm designing something, I'm creating, I'm building a brand. But there's something different where it's like intriguing or draws someone in or makes them ask questions. And I mean, really, it's all just a factor of taste. And if you don't have anyone on the team that does have some level of taste, and this is the kind of thing that's hard to develop, and some of it is innate and comes from like world experience, like how do you have tasteful input on what you're doing? And I think that's why you see now there is this influx of like the term creative director has gotten like overblown, but it's for a reason. It's because brands really need to figure out that X factor, and they really need to figure out who they can rely on. And it's not, you know, kind of what you think of when it's like someone sitting there creating mood boards. It's people really taking into account like what resonates and is interesting and will stimulate a target demographic, and how do we apply that to all our decisions. And that's a extremely hard thing to go from good to great on.
Yeah. And I also would add too, like fire fast and fire early. You know, like often the people who broke the brand aren't going to be the ones that fix it, you know, and there's such a complexity to personnel because a lot of these decisions are subjective. And when you're hiring experts at the highest level, there's not much to go off of other than like really opinion, because like data can tell you anything and data isn't always right, you know? So like that's another thing too, I think, is just if you don't make the right call, get them out fast.
Yeah, and people are so removed also. Like a lot of those decision makers are removed from social media. Not because I agree. I think you get people that are either going to use data or they're going to use their opinion, and then you have this entire generation of like, okay, cool, well, you can make the most interesting thing possible, but if it doesn't resonate on social, if it doesn't move or drive a conversation, and that's why I think what Jacques Mou does is so interesting, is because every one of those is a social moment. It's tailor built with someone with an understanding of how, not just how it will perform on their own social, but how the conversation that others partake in around the brand is going to get shaped. And you can only really do that with people that are like truly like living in our internet culture. And like those are I think the hard people to come by. And it's also not where people look to go hire, because people don't want to go hire somebody who has X social media presence or who's also doing 3 other things. And those are the people that have the knowledge base to be able to actually execute this stuff.
Yeah, they don't want the work. You know, like it's never convenient when you're busy to take on the extra work, but like that's the difference of a great brand. And you also, I think, schooled me on the pronunciation. Can you tell me to properly pronounce?
No, I think you might be right. I pronounce Jacques Mou, but I think you may also be pronouncing it right. I always get torched for my pronunciations online, so I'm trying, but
Oh, okay. I thought you knew what you were talking about. Okay, so we'll figure this out afterwards.
Yeah, no. This is, if you say something convincingly enough on the internet, then. But I'm.
You understand controversy, my friend.
I've looked it up a few times, and I'm decently promising.
No, I think that. Well, then you would be right,
Jacques
Jacques Mou. I mean, it wouldn't be the first time I got a foreign name wrong. I had to do a whole video on Porsche because I was blown away that it wasn't Porsche. I thought my friend who said she got a Porsche was being an idiot. I was like, girl.
It is. No, it was one of those. I said that I had a big video blow up about Porsche, and it's so funny. Like, I don't know. I am surrounded on my block by people that own Porsches, and
say Porsche.
One of them approximately once say Porsche, and yeah, like or I mean, like people. So it's like you can go completely either way, and people's reliance to want to stick to somebody on grammar or pronunciation. We live in this like internet gray area world where like there's no way, like things sort of become what the internet refers to them as, you know, is like, I think people were talking about that. I think the term aesthetics or aesthetic was one where people were like, well, that's not an aesthetic if you're just saying it as a generic. It's like, okay, kind of terminology becomes what the internet says it is. And I think that's an interesting concept too.
I mean, semantics change, right? I say that all the time. Like we know that, but also, what was I going to say? The thing that's funny, though, about the Porsche versus Porsches, I just think that's such a great opportunity that Porsche should lean into in marketing in the West. Like, if 90% of the people are pronouncing it wrong, like, what a great campaign that would, like, stick out and have conversation. Like, I was floored when I heard that. I'm like, how have I gone this long without the brand correcting it? Like, that is partially a brand problem because Porsche... Oh, do they have a whole section on the website? But that'd be a great campaign because I'm like, this is a great opportunity to stand out and to be a differentiator in the marketplace, especially when people who drive Porsches are real money. You know, like I had this conversation with a client. He's like, you know, my dream is to drive a Porsche something. And he goes, he lives in Miami, and this is his words, not mine. He goes, you know, drug dealers don't drive Porsches. And I'm like, great point. Great point. So Porsche could lean into the messaging because like its true customer wants to pronounce it right.
But I think, and it's funny that they're a brand I think that will be successful regardless of how their social and campaigning is. But man, do they have so much opportunity with how popular they are. Their colors, which is a whole interesting conversation, even driving some things like this. Yeah.
Before we wrap up, I wanted to just get you to, I saw you had a really interesting video on kind of the predictions of font and where you think, maybe it's not 2024 branding, maybe it's just kind of what we're moving towards. I'd love to get your takeaways on that.
Did you say on fonts or on
fonts? But then I also saw you were just talking about too with like aesthetics, creative direction. I was really impressed by the font video, but I just kind of, I want it all if you can share.
Oh yeah, no problem. Well, I think it's funny now we're in this. What is it? It used to be things were like trending for like a year or two, and now I feel like we're in like the trend singularity, where like innovation happens faster and faster until it's unrecognizable. I feel like everything's happening at once now. Like you can say Louis Vuitton went Western, Western's going to be in, then it's going to be out. No, I think it's something. Once something arrives, it's in forever. And I think the only thing that's really out is like super stark and simple, like Casper millennial style branding, you know, or that kind of that era of like very, very simple like minimalism. But what I see happening here is these living brands almost, where like packaging is iterating consistently, like logos are iterating consistently, where the brand guides and what people are putting together is like constantly evolving, where like every release is a special edition, for lack of a better term, because like the brand, there's so much exploration from the consumer side. There's so much, like whether even you're buying the same thing you did before, they just feel like it's something new. That I feel like it's kind of really opens up an interesting creative palette for new and existing brands to just kind of constantly be in shift. And obviously that's a lot of design work. It's a lot of creative work, but that's kind of the culture we're in now, where it's like, you need to make content every day. You need to have iterations happening all the time. And I think the brands that kind of embrace that and really work through it and have consistency in their product, but have variation in their presentation, brand, and marketing are kind of on the right wave.
Yeah, and I love what you're saying too, because it's what I like.
What do you go?
I like to just touch on that. You have to be prepared to make mistakes, but you have to correct quickly. So there's such a fear and their brands feel paralyzed to not make mistakes, and by not making mistakes or not doing anything interesting. And then also the brands aren't learning fast enough from things aren't working. Like I get hired by big companies and they're like, hey, we've been shadow banned for 6 months and we're posting the same thing. Like, can you come in and take a look? And I'm like, what? You've been doing the same thing for 6 months and you've decided to just finally reach out and like ask to do something different. So I think that that's a good takeaway, is see everything that you do as iterative, as growing, as evolving. If your brand is a personality, like a person, you grow and you're amalgamating to the environment around you. So make changes as you go.
Yeah. The shadow banning one hits home, because I get a lot of brands that can hit that up. And I think I can say without a shadow of a doubt, unless you like are in a restricted market of some kind, that like you're not shadow banned, your content just sucks.
It literally sucks.
And it is the case for brand after brand after brand. And if it sucks, what do you have to lose by experimenting? Like people talk about that a lot. Like I do a lot of videos. I have videos flop all the time. I have a lot of other bigger creators who kind of ask me about it. And I'm like, yeah, like if I don't put out 1 or 2 videos every week that don't do well, I'm not really pushing it.
You're not learning
it doesn't
either.
matter. It doesn't affect my income. All it affects is ego. Yeah. And I think that brands need to look at that same way, like, and then give it some room. It's like, oh, we did one different thing, it didn't work. I'm like, yeah, like a concept to get proven is going to take you at least 5 to 10 posts to know if it actually resonates. And yes. I don't know. So if any brands are listening and like struggling with social media, like just follow that and you will find your way out.
And also though, like look at metrics that matter, right? Like I find videos that I would consider are a flop by like my egoic metric are often the ones that when I speak with clients later are like, that was the one that really drove me to buy. And because it doesn't need to connect to as many people. Like the videos that do the 2-5 million, that's why I want to talk about, you know, the pans and the luggage. Like it's outside of your expert. It's generic. It speaks to 11 million people, but who you really service and what you offer isn't necessarily a 11 million person audience. But so it's a metric that matters as well. I think is important.
I agree. That egoic metric is a really important one to think about, because like I look at content in a funnel where those are top of funnel videos. It gets my face out there. It identifies me to potential people that might be interested. And I think because it is very kind of marketing specific, I'm not like trying to go purely viral. if people are following me from that, it's because they want my take on marketing or branding. So I feel like it gets me to the right folks.
Yeah.
But I think exactly. And it starts to get people interested to them. But then you might put out a more tactical video they see later that they go, okay, like I want to follow this person or learn from them. But like the real point of it is like, what is your real size of your target audience? Like I look at that, like I have 500,000 followers roughly across all social media. I don't think there's 500,000 people that are that invested in building a marketing or a brand or what I have to say. And so it's almost my responsibility to try to get to less, or to try to like zone in on where that is. And that's a very different metric than what social tells you, which is keep growing. And there's no right way to work around those things now. This is all new concepts that we're dealing with. There isn't like a history for it.
You're so right. And I think you really nailed it too when you said like your content sucks, because like the larger question that needs to be even asked is like, what is the role of a business on TikTok? You know, like if you're not educating or entertaining, like you're just advertising. Like it's not organic content posting. And it's hilarious.
Not value or entertainment.
That's it. Period. And I have so many CEOs that are like, TikTok should just reward us because we're the reasons we keep it alive. I'm like, you're delusional. TikTok cares more about having 1 billion people a day on the app than you being rewarded for your shitty content. Like they think that they can just buy themselves a place when we're in an attention economy. Like, haven't you learned since like the phone plugged in and turned on that it's no longer a billboard? Like we can swipe away from you. So like, give us something good.
And that's literally the first conversation I have in any of those is like, you need to pick one. Is it value or is it entertainment? If you're not going to pick, and we're not going to go down your choices from there,
you're dead otherwise. Goodbye. Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. But yeah, 2024.
I feel like we're on the same page.
We definitely are on the same page. 2024 trends, I think, I agree with you. I think that we're going to be, I also think though that there's going to be, it's going to go actually back to a bit of meritocracy. I think it's going to be less focused on trying to please everyone and just pleasing your specific audience. I think there was a lot of noise and confusion that big political campaigns that seemed kind and positive on the face of it actually don't work to just be slapped on faceless brands. I think the curtain on ESG has been pulled. I think the millennials that were in the driver's seat for putting their personal opinions and point of views onto faceless brands aren't gonna have the same autonomy that they once had. And I think we're gonna get hopefully back to what branding should be about, which is a great package but a great product. So that's what I'm predicting for 2024.
I think it's spot on.
All right, thanks for coming in.
No, appreciate you having me.
This was great, Oren. Where can people find you if they want to follow along and learn more about you?
At Oren Meets World, OREN, on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Twitter. And then we have a newsletter called Hyper. It's mail.hyperstudios.us, where we dive into this as well. But social media is the easiest way. And send me a DM if you have any questions. I'm always around.
Awesome. I got one last question for you. What is your death row meal?
Ooh, that's a good one. Steak. Just steak.
From anywhere?
Oh, and if I have to get really specific on it,
like you're dying, you get one more.
If I'm dying and I get one meal, that's a can of worms I'm not yet ready to open. But like honestly, I think I would be very content with just like one incredible like ribeye cap or tomahawk from someone who knows what they're doing.
I mean, amazing. Thanks for coming in, Oren. It was awesome having you.